My name is Wylea Chase. I am a member of the Black and Brown Coalition for Educational Equity and Excellence. I'm happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Shirley Brandman, and also a member of the Black and Brown Coalition for Educational Equity and Excellence. We're based in Montgomery County, Maryland. We worked on a project looking at how our school district, which is a fairly large district and right now represents about 54% of Black and Brown students in our student demographic, how our school district could do a better job writ large engaging the voices of Black and Brown and families of low income in all strategic decision-making, but specifically also focused on around allocating the federal ARPA dollars that are going to be so crucial for the recovery of the tremendous learning loss that impacted our communities during COVID. We came through the COVID pandemic seeing things about our communities that we may have known before, but didn't have to confront. And one of those things that we learned is that understanding the lived experiences of our most underserved students and families needs to inform our policies, our practices, and our decision-making. So while our district has recognized that they want to invest in tutoring, for example, there hasn't been enough conversation about what else beyond that and how those students and families would ask the district to provide the kind of support that their young people will need, both to catch up and keep up academically, but also very intentionally to address the incredibly adverse social and emotional impact of weathering this pandemic.
You know, an offshoot of that is of our student population, Black and Brown students being, adversely and negatively impacted, leads to our work around the restorative justice practices and why restorative justice exists, because it's about healing, right? But what are we healing? We're healing the inequities, the racial inequities that negatively and disproportionately impact our Black and Brown students, and that have been exacerbated by COVID. So already behind, and now exacerbated and made even worse due to COVID. And so then how are our kids showing up in school, right? And then how are they being treated? Forget academically, well, not forget academically, but socially and emotionally, right? How are they being responded to? It was already negative. We were already behind. And so in our restorative justice work, we are endeavoring to work alongside our restorative justice unit to educate parents, families, and caregivers in Montgomery County about the fact that restorative justice practices are now mandatory in our schools. Many don't know that. Our restorative justice unit is very small. It is being run by about 4 to 5 professional staff members for this huge school district, one of the largest in the state of Maryland.
We have over 160,000 students, right?
Right. And so this is mandatory in each school. There are some people who are restorative, who have been lifted as restorative justice coaches in each school. It's still not enough, because they don't have the training that those 4 to 5 people in the restorative justice unit have. And so what we're endeavoring to do outside of our paid jobs as volunteers is to educate the community, specifically the Black and Brown community, that this exists, what it means, and how to benefit from this thing that can benefit their students in the community. And so that's a huge undertaking. It's a large endeavor. And it would be great if ARPA funds could be used for that, to engage families, but to also increase the staff for the restorative justice unit.
So some of what underlies all this work is a recognition that parents often have to try to figure out how to navigate opportunity. And part of where the coalition is pushing is for the district to recognize that they need to proactively engage families, not wait for families to try to find their way into resources and support, that outreach has to be culturally and linguistically appropriate, which requires outreach, building relationships, building trusting relationships, not always just showing up in a community to push out information, but showing up in a community to ask questions and listen and hear what's needed. And that kind of work, often referred to in the research as meaningfully using a racial equity lens, that starts by saying, what do some of our most impacted community needs, and allows that to be the driver of resource allocation, rather than making decisions about how resources are going to be allocated and then simply telling families this is available for you.
Right. And too often our district says that it is advocating for the most impacted families, students. However, they're not at the table. So you are advocating, or they are advocating from their own lens, which is typically not a racial equity lens, especially if you don't have those people most impacted at the table, right? So you don't have their voices. So that our school district is saying this is needed, that's needed, but is it really? How do you know? Because you're going from your own lens of what you might think. But invite those people to the table, and it can't be done via PTA, for instance, which is largely how it's done, because those Black and brown families, while they want the same thing as their white counterparts for their children, we all do, don't feel welcomed. This is not a space that is typically for them, right? And so we are asking that trusted community organizations and members be engaged to then engage those most negatively impacted families.
Initially, we thought we would use some of the funding from our Seek Common Ground Accelerator to work with a researcher at the University of Maryland so that we could really talk to Black and brown parents to learn from them, where are some of those barriers? One of the challenges was, particularly in this summer coming through COVID, we really found that a lot of families needed to disconnect. It was very difficult, more so than in years past, to do the kind of outreach to hear directly from community members. We did try to offer stipends. We did try to use our networks to bring people in. We didn't get as much participation this summer as we would have hoped, and that caused us to change gears a little bit. We also found, and this is something that we as a coalition are continuing to struggle with and learn, we are proud that our roots are in really bringing together advocacy in the Black and brown community that very traditionally have advocated in parallel, but not in tandem. And we are very much trying to take advantage of the power that comes when 54% of our demographic, Black and brown students and families, stand shoulder to shoulder. But we learned again this summer that when you look at barriers, when you look at inequities, there often are differences in the Black and brown community. For so many of our Latino families, language remained the #1 barrier, which was not necessarily true for our Black families. So while they experienced the adverse impact of not having access or not participating or not feeling welcome, the barriers are sometimes different, and how we think about and talk about them are sometimes different, even as we want to come together in our advocacy, but just recognizing that we are not going to be able to, nor should we try to minimize or change or fail to honor the fact that the causes and the barriers and the limitations may feel different in the Black and brown community. But when we raise them up together on behalf of all children, we respect the fact that there are differences in the challenges, but that we're coming together in the solutions.
Not far enough. Not far enough. There's too many people whose lives, I have to keep on saying, are negatively impacted that don't even know about this work. There's only so much we can do. We, the Black and Brown Coalition, can do, but we're still trying to do it. But we need partners at the table to do it. And, I think another, talking about expanding on what Shirley just mentioned, another barrier for us this summer was that, there were lots of Black and brown families that would have participated if they trusted the process. Because there are too many times when we have these great shiny programs in our district that ultimately go nowhere. They don't move the needle forward. Numbers, data is there, we have it, but nothing positive happens that's impacted. And so you have families, caregivers acting in silos because, well, the district is not going to do it. I'm going to do what I can for my family. What do you tackle first? Do you tackle the systemic and racist history and then try to work for it? Do we have time for that? So that long answer, the long and short of it is not enough.
So the initial deadlines that districts faced to get their first plans in resulted, at least in our county, in a little bit of a rush to try to figure out how do we want to spend these dollars. And there was pushback from some of the representatives of the Black and Brown Coalition who served on some of these committees, saying, having us in a committee with many other people where each of us have 1 minute's worth of time to share a thought is not the same as really interacting with underserved students and parents and hearing what they need. And assurances were given that we had to meet deadlines, but we would go back and do the deeper work. And the reality is we haven't gone back to do the deeper work. Some of it is that I think we all maybe expected that we'd start this year with the pandemic very far in the rearview mirror. And we are struggling with continued intermittent and ongoing breakthrough cases. And there's a lot of time that's been invested in continuing to address how the district will respond to protocols on testing and quarantining. And that truly has been a distraction, but not an excuse. We need to really now think about, in the time that we have this money, how we more deeply connect with families. So as we've mentioned, the district has invested in tutoring. The district has also made a virtual academy a continuing option for some families to opt into. The majority of the students in that virtual academy are Black and Brown students, even though many of the Black and Brown students did not benefit from and did not succeed in virtual learning. And the district has not paused to dig deeper to find out what might be going on here and how might we need to invest funds that we have if we're going to keep these students in a virtual space for one more year to make sure that they have better academic outcomes going forward. The district recently released some data around the impact of the learning loss, and particularly in the younger grades, second grade, particularly in the Black and Brown community, on math and literacy readiness. We saw huge declines compared to grade 2 pre-pandemic. We are urging the district, working at high levels with the interim superintendent, leadership of the district, as well as galvanizing the community and growing our grassroots base, to continue to push for the fact that unless and until we develop the kind of infrastructure that really allows us to build relationships, to bring families in, as Wylea said, in a very trusting way, to participate in framing at the front end and not approving at the back end, the way that we'll move forward through a truly unprecedented crisis in terms of student learning, impact on the social and emotional well-being of our communities, and frankly, continuing to deal with ongoing health crises. In this accelerator, we really had an opportunity to connect with the Kentucky Student Voice team. And that was a very powerful opportunity in our learning community, because we as a coalition have been thinking about and candidly struggling a little bit with how to meaningfully engage student voice in our work, how to have students not simply executing on plans that adults have made, but really involving students in the brainstorming, in the shaping and the design of the work, and ensuring that their vision and their ideas help to drive and frame the advocacy. We were inspired by the Kentucky Student Voice team, and this summer we worked with an intern to marshal our first youth influencers meeting. We identified current students and graduates who were already speaking out on social media as educational equity warriors and invited them in to look for synergies, to share their thoughts and learn about the coalition. And we are now continuing to nurture that relationship, inspired by and following some of the wonderful advice we got from one of the partners in our learning community.
My advice would be to attend as many of the listening sessions and the webinars that See Common Ground offers attend as many as you can, take notes, stay on if the person that is presenting is able to, at the end, answer questions. There was a wealth of information and resources shared that was so beneficial to me and to us, not only as the Black and Brown Coalition, but in all of the other work that I'm doing in Montgomery County around youth and families, coalition building, and all those different things. And so it just all was just all helpful. Having our youth voices at the table, right? Because many times as adults and as parents, you know, again, what we think our kids need, you know, and what they're actually dealing with in school could be different, you know? And so having those kids, giving those kids a voice, not even giving them a voice, but allowing them access to decision-making that directly impacts them. And to hear Kentucky student voices talk about how they do that, I consider that a best practice, right? Why recreate the wheel when we can talk directly to them and find out and figure out how they did it? And so Seek Common Ground allowed that access. So I don't have my notes to go directly to Shirley. I can't even remember.
It was
her
Dr.
name.
Pam Cantor with
Yeah.
Turnaround.
Oh my gosh, she was so awesome. She was so awesome. And, you know, just really succinct, great information in a half hour. Like, I didn't think that that was possible, but it was really good. So my advice would be to attend as many as possible, to really take notes, to stay on, to engage. And when given the opportunity to reach out to them directly, do it.